Putin Bad News. Russia's leader is starting to lose it. Can Putin still be found? In any case, where is he? Asked Igor Strelkov, ex-defense minister of the self-declared Donetsk People's Republic, in one of his regular video rants on Telegram last month. That is an interesting query. Since the 3rd of May, up to 30 Ukrainian drones have fallen among the billionaire dachas of Russia's elite along the secluded Rublevo-Uspensko highway. 2 of these drones hit the Kremlin. Attacking from Ukraine, anti-Putin Russians have taken control of at least 8 villages in Belgorod province, captured Russian soldiers, and launched drone attacks on Belgorod, Voronezh, and Kursk. A Russian regular army battalion commander was kidnapped and beaten by the Wagner mercenary group, who then released him only after he confessed on camera that he had drunkenly ordered his men to shell Wagner positions. Meanwhile, Wagner's founder and leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has been touring Russia to recruit new members and has given a series of highly inflammatory interviews, including one in which he called for Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu to be tried and executed for aiding in the genocide of the Russian population. Either we pass the reins of government to someone more qualified, or we shoulder the responsibility ourselves. Also, Russian leader Vladimir Putin has ended military operations, as stated by Strelkov. While speaking to a group of children, Putin recently claimed that the Ukrainian counteroffensive had failed to achieve any of its goals, before admitting that Russia had lost 54 tanks the week prior. He also had breakfast with his ally Alexander Lukashenko and agreed that Russian tactical nuclear missiles would be deployed in neighboring Belarus. Putin always seemed hunched over and bloated at these events. You can make reports to a mummy, but that does not mean that the reports are heard, Strelkov continued, leveling an open criticism at Putin. Either we hand over power to someone more qualified, or we shoulder the responsibility ourselves. You can't keep a dead horse from the river that it drowned in a secret forever. The ship has begun to sink. Putin's absence is glaring as Russia struggles under Ukrainian attack. Prigozhin, founder of Wagner, is a bloodthirsty and aggressive ultra-patriot who also happens to be the most realistic and articulate public voice on the unfolding dangers facing Russia. Prigozhin, who spent 9 years in prison for theft before becoming a billionaire caterer and close Putin ally, said, "Conscripts are being thrown against an enemy who is well prepared and well armed." Prigozhin asked his archenemy Shoigu, "Did you prepare at all for this war? Have you double-checked that the army is prepared? If we're in such dire straits, why haven't you gone to the Duma and asked for martial law to be declared?" Prigozhin discredited the Russian Ministry of Defense's claim that they had successfully repelled an incursion by a Russian volunteer corps supported by the Ukrainian government in Belgorod, claiming that official photos of dead invaders were staged. He made the comparison between the Russian government's totally contemptuous abandonment of civilians in frontline Belgorod towns like Shebekino and the Ukrainian government's evacuation and brave and honorable defense of Bakhmut. He raged, "They don't care what happens to people anywhere they are not, except on Rublevka," referring to the affluent Moscow suburb where Putin and the Russian elite live. Thank goodness the Ukrainians made a hit on that. Widely used Thomas Shawn. For what reason is Islamic slavery never discussed? Prigozhin went even further, saying that the headquarters of the General Staff in Moscow and the Army's command post in Rostov-on-Don were the 2 places in Russia that NATO would never attack because, we might have a chance of winning this war, if the enemy succeeded in eliminating Russia's current army command. Prigozhin allegedly suggested that Russia should emulate General Augusto Pinochet's Chile by having the Russian elite in a stadium surrounded by armed men with machine guns, a reference to letters from Belgorod residents asking Wagner for help. As a result of the gap between the Kremlin elite and regular Russians whose children come back in zinc coffins from Ukraine, he said, Russia was at risk of another revolution like the one in 1917. This is more than just heated rhetoric, it's a call to arms. And let's be clear, Prigozhin isn't some wacky outsider. His Wagner mercenaries have been an integral part of the Kremlin's war effort in Ukraine, and he is, or was, a close personal ally of Putin. He has at his disposal at least 50,000 loyal, heavily armed followers. Prigozhin's men arrested and tortured Lieutenant Colonel Roman Venevitin, commander of Russia's 72nd Motorized Rifle Brigade, earlier this month, demonstrating their utter disdain for the regular Russian army. Following his freedom, Venevitin accused Wagner of issuing regular, death threats, stealing military equipment, kidnapping Russian soldiers in exchange for ammunition, and making them work as warehouse men for the wounded and dead. If the regular Russian army can't free Belgorod, Prigozhin and Wagner will. He made this threat clear in his most recent video interview. He growled, "My commanders are angry. When they hear briefings from the defense ministry, they grab their pistols. We won't stand by while grandmothers and kids in Belgorod die like dogs while Shoigu's offspring sit around slathering their behinds in Vaseline. And you can get to Rublevka from Belgorod in no time at all. It's a mystery how Prigozhin is still alive, much less free to publicly criticize the Russian war effort and make death threats against Putin's top ministers." Like the ultra-nationalist firebrand Vladimir Zhirinovsky before him, some Machiavellian minds have argued that Prigozhin is useful to the Kremlin as a kind of extremist boogeyman who makes Putin appear sane and reasonable. But the more plausible explanation is that Putin's apparent paralysis has allowed Prigozhin to rise to prominence. The Kremlin is also losing control of the overall war narrative in other ways. Margarita Simonyan, one of Russia's most aggressive propagandists, declared last week that the war was hopeless. "Isn't it great that we could put an end to all of this violence right now?" Simonyan made these comments on Vladimir Solovyov's perennial program on Russian state television. "Leave the front lines where they are, put a halt to the fighting, and have a vote. People can remain loyal to whichever camp they prefer." Senior lawmaker and member of the ruling United Russia Party Konstantin Zachelin said on national television that the invasion had accomplished nothing. Zachelin said, "Let's get out of this somehow," prompting an inquiry by his party's apparatus. 53% of Russians said they thought their friends and family were in an anxious mood, in a poll taken in May, an increase of 11% from April.